Dear students, in today's episode, we will be studying the first chapter of history, that is how, when and where. In today's session, we will be discussing about the sources to study the colonial Indian history. Dear students, in the previous episode, you studied the changes that took place in writing history after the coming of the British East India Company. The British started to study India and our past in order to administer and exploit her resources. The British divided Indian history on religious backgrounds and started publishing reports about India and her past in favor of the British Empire. They termed Indian history as a period of darkness. They glorified and justified the British rule as an attempt to educate the Indians. They divided the period of colonial rule based on the reigns of governor generals and viceroys without considering our people in their histories. With these interpretations being completely unacceptable and biased, it is necessary to redefine Indian history through fair means. What are the sources available to us to reconstruct our history? Where were they kept? How do we define history through these means? Let us explore as we study this chapter. The major concepts of today's session are writing and preserving records, studying records from archives and photographs, importance of colonial documents, institutions set up for surveying, analyzing data collected by various institutions, understanding the use of surveys in constructing history, limitations of these records and surveys, looking for information from other sources, and experiencing the act of collecting and processing data. After studying today's session, you will be able to identify different types of sources, archaeological, literary, etc., and describe their use in the reconstruction of the history of the colonial period. You will be able to synthesize information related to various historical developments. Official records that were written and preserved by the British government are our primary source of information in constructing history. What do we mean by official records? The British believed that the act of writing was important. Every instruction, plan, policy decision, agreement and investigation had to be clearly written up. Once this was done, things could be easily discussed and debated. These records are called as the official records of the British administration. As you see the images of certain documents on your screen, can you think of where and how these documents were preserved? The data pertaining to individuals was collected and preserved in the Tehsildar's office. Not just the Tehsildar's office, but all offices such as that of the Collectorate, the Commissioner, the Secretariats and courts had their own record rooms where every detail was collected and preserved. The very next question that appears to our mind is that have all these records survived? Many such records of the ancient and medieval times were destroyed. Very true. Many records of ancient and medieval times were destroyed as a result of rains, floods, destroyed by natural disasters and by pests. But in colonial India, the British established special institutions like archives and museums to collect and preserve these records. The National Archives of India was set up at Calcutta in 1891 to preserve such documents. Currently, they can be studied from the National Archives Museum, which is in New Delhi. You may also obtain these records and study them. How do you think were these records written at the first place? As you already observed, these records were carefully and beautifully copied by calligraphists. With the spread of the printing press, these documents were now printed and multiple copies were preserved. Look at this piece of record from one of the police stations in Pune. What do you understand from this? How can we construct history based on these records? On 16th May 1875, the District Magistrate of Pune wrote to the Police Commissioner, "On arrival at Supa on Saturday 15th of May, I learnt of the disturbance. One house of a moneylender was burned down. About a dozen were forcibly broken into and completely gutted of their content. Account papers, bonds, grains, country cloth were burnt in the street, where heaps of ashes are still to be seen. The chief constable apprehended 50 persons. Stolen property worth Rs 2,000 was recovered. The estimated loss is over Rs 25,000. Moneylenders claim it over 1 lakh. The report talks about villagers burning down the records of moneylenders and the loss of money and property reported by them. Reports such as these can be used to analyze the mindset of the people during those times and the events that happened in the villages. Photography is also an important source for understanding our history, which was preserved by the British. Can you guess how photography was used by the historians by observing these images? From the images of Jaipur, Tiruchirappalli and Calcutta, you can visualize the town life and landscapes. Look how beautiful our cities were 200 years ago. You can identify the Amber Palace in Jaipur, the Rockfort Temple in Tiruchirappalli, and the Bura Bazaar in Calcutta. Not much has changed, right? Look at the river Indus as she flows from Kashmir down the valley. Fill your eyes with the scenic beauty of the river and the valley. This image speaks of the famine that took place in 1876 at Madras. You can find large number of people starving and hoping for food in scorching heat. Here are some beautiful images of the residents of different towns. Observe the changes in their clothes and identify it with the local tradition. The residents of Kutch, a family from Surat and Nagpur, and the women of Bombay. What changes do you find in the clothing pattern of these towns in current world? The British paid high importance in collecting and preserving records for future references. These records are thus our primary source of information in reconstructing our history. After some years of rule, the East India Company soon realized that it was not ruling efficiently enough to exploit India's resources. An efficient administration needed knowledge of the past. Hence, the company started to survey the nation, understand India's climate, topography, cropping pattern and local histories. It also decided to translate ancient Indian works into English. The company established many institutions for surveying India, such as the Archaeological Survey of India, the Botanical Survey of India, the Zoological Survey of India, the Forest Survey of India, the Geological Survey of India, and so on. The Archaeological Survey of India was established to study the ancient and medieval history of India. The Botanical Survey of India was created to study the flora or plant species across the length and breadth of India, while the Zoological Survey of India was established to explore the fauna or animal species in the country. Similarly, the Forest Survey of India was created to identify and study the forest types that existed in India, and the Geological Survey of India was asked to study the geology of India. These institutions perform the same duties even today under the government of India. You may ask as to how these institutions helped the British rule India efficiently. Let us discuss some of these institutions that helped the British. The Geological Survey of India, or the GSI, was given the role of identifying different soil patterns in the country. In these images, you can see officials surveying a village and the first map of India produced by the Geological Survey of India in 1877. The GSI also discovered areas that were rich in copper, coal, iron and petroleum. Can you tell me how these would have helped the British? Discovering elements like coal and iron helped the company exploit these resources fully and make profit by selling products made of those minerals. The surveys on soil allowed Britishers to identify different profitable crops that could be grown on Indian soil. One such crop was the indigo, about which we will learn in the coming chapters. Here is a report made by a British official who was asked to explore the eastern India. Observe the motive behind his report. The view of the country is exceedingly fine. The cultivation, especially the narrow valleys of rice winding in all directions, the cleared lands with scattered trees, and the rocky hills are in perfection. All that is wanted is some appearance of progress in the area and a vastly extended and improved cultivation, of which the country is highly susceptible. Plantations of Asan and Palas for Tesar and Lac should occupy the place of woods to as great an extent as the demand will admit. The remainder might be all cleared and the greater part cultivated, while what is not fit for the purpose might rear Plumera and Mova. This report speaks about the findings of the explorer and also speaks about how this region can be modified to fulfill the profits of the British. Similarly, the Asiatic Society of Bengal was given the task of translating Sanskrit and Persian texts to English. Some of these translations were of the Bhagavad Gita, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and even works such as the Aini-Akbari, about which you have studied in class 7. A question may arise as to why these works were studied by the Britishers. These works were studied in order to understand India's beliefs, culture, and lives of our people. They further helped Britishers frame laws for our country and helped establish civil and criminal procedure courts. Now, since you have studied the researches of two departments, how do you think were the researches of the Forest Survey of India might have been used? Think about it. The most important of these researches was the surveying of the Indian population. This was called the census and happened in 1872 for the first time. The census collected detailed records of the number of people in all provinces of India, noting information on castes, religion, and occupation. Can you tell when the next census is scheduled in India? Yes, the next census is scheduled to happen in 2021. We now have an idea of how these researches were significant to the British. Let us discuss how these researches and surveys are important to historians in reconstructing our history. The data collected from these surveys help historians get a statistical figure of many things, such as the total population, gender-age ratio, economic condition of the people, occupation of the people, the languages spoken by them, and the region-wise distribution of population, and many more. We can also find out the economic and political activities that were undertaken by the Britishers after conducting these surveys and how they led to further exploitation of the common public. But also remember, not all actions of the Britishers led to exploitation. Even though that was their primary motive, some of them actually benefited the Indian society. For example, establishing a systematic education system and the ban on the practice of sati were some decisions that actually helped the public. While these records and surveys are of immense importance to the historians, they cannot be solely used to construct the history of our past. The data preserved by the Britishers in these archives provide the historians information from a single perspective. We will now explore the limitations of these official records and will also explore the other sources through which we can construct our history. Now, since we have studied the official records and their significance, can you point out the drawbacks of these records? They talk only about the things the Britishers were interested to know. Only records they wanted to preserve are archived. They do not help us understand what the people felt. They do not help us know the reasons behind the actions of the public. These reports presented only a general view of the happenings of those times, and we have no access to the ground reality of these issues. These reports and surveys were biased, as we do not hear of any feelings or emotions from the public in these reports. Since these records were conducted by the British, they only talk about what the British wanted to know. As a student of history, it is necessary to look at our past from all perspectives. Let us now explore what are the other sources through which we can understand our past. The diaries of local people, accounts of travelers, books written by public might be used to construct history. Newspapers and journals published by Indians could also be used to understand the events of the past. Books written by our freedom fighters, such as the works of Mahatma Gandhi, My Experiments with Truth and Hind Swaraj, and the works of Jawaharlal Nehru, The Discovery of India, throw light on lot of information. Works of V.D. Savarkar, The War of Indian Independence 1857, and works of Bal Gangadhar Tilak show us the condition of the people during their times. There are other sources as well. Poems, paintings, short stories and novels, and even letters can be used to understand the emotions of the common public during those times. Here are two images, both depicting the same event but in a different perspective. What do we observe from these images? Both images are from the revolt of 1857. The first image portrays Lakshmibai as a fearless fighter and the Britishers as evil, while in the second image, a woman is seen fighting the local people who are shown as cruel and greedy. In many events, images such as the first image were published throughout India, while in Europe, the images such as the second image were published, thus spreading a false picture of reality. It is therefore necessary for historians to look at all perspectives before writing the history. These sources, such as books and diaries, were written by the people who were educated. But most of India was illiterate during that time. How do we come to know of the history of the tribals and the uneducated mass? One way is folklore, which was composed and spread across all communities. What do we mean by folklore? Folklore are the traditional beliefs, customs and stories that were passed through generations by word of mouth. I think by now you can figure out yourself how these folklore help us in the construction of our history. Think about the other sources through which we could construct our history as we explore the upcoming chapters. Dear students, that brings us to the end of this chapter. Now, let us discuss what we have learnt in today's session. The British East India Company wrote and preserved all reports for future analysis. They are helpful in viewing history from the British point of view. To further understand India's past, the British set up many research institutions. These institutions were asked to explore Indian culture and her resources to exploit and administer the public. The official reports and surveys speak only about what the British wanted to know. In order to get a clear picture, we have to refer diaries, novels, biographies, poems, paintings and letters. In the beginning of this video, you saw important documents that were preserved by the British. Discuss with your friends the importance of preserving records. Write it down and submit it to your teacher. The next census is scheduled to happen in 2021. How do you think such a vast survey is conducted? How is the information of billions of people collected? Find out the process involved in the census of 2021. Write a brief report and submit it to your teacher. Dear students, hope you enjoyed today's session. In the next chapter, you will learn how the British East India Company came to India for the purpose of trade and started conquering different kingdoms and finally started ruling the entire country. Thank you.